Don't skip, your soulmate is hiding 3 words they desperately want to say. Stay here. Please don't scroll. I'm asking you this not for drama, not for curiosity, but because if you leave too quickly, you'll miss something that was meant to reach you at the exact emotional frequency you're in right now. This isn't content. This is a moment. And moments like this don't repeat themselves easily. There are 3 words your soulmate is carrying inside them, and those words are not light. They are not casual. They are not passing thoughts. They are heavy because they are true, and truth changes things. These words have been sitting in their chest, rising to their throat, retreating back into silence again and again. Not because they don't matter, but because they matter enough to rearrange their life the moment they're spoken. Your soulmate is not unaware. They are not confused. They are not indifferent. What they are is restrained. And restraint is one of the most misunderstood emotional states there is. People assume silence means lack of feeling, but often silence is what happens when feeling is too strong to release safely. People don't hide words that mean nothing. They hide words that would expose them completely. Right now, your soulmate is living in 2 worlds at once. In the outer world, they are functioning. They're showing up. They're fulfilling roles. They're doing what is expected of them. If someone looked at their life from the outside, they might think everything is fine. But inside, there is a quiet, persistent tension that never fully leaves. A sense that something important has been left unsaid. A feeling that there is a conversation that should have happened, but didn't. And you are at the center of that tension. They don't think about you all the time in an obsessive way. It's not like that. It's subtler, deeper, more unsettling. They think about you when their guard drops. When they're alone. When the noise fades. When they're not performing a version of themselves for the world. That's when you appear, not as a fantasy, not as an escape, but as a presence. A recognition. You didn't enter their life loudly. You didn't force your way in. You didn't demand space. You arrived naturally, and that's what made the impact so strong. You saw them in ways they weren't used to being seen. You understood things they didn't explain. You noticed shifts they didn't announce. And you didn't use that awareness to control them, you simply held it. That kind of presence stays with a person. And this is where the 3 words began to form. At first, they tried to dismiss them. Told themselves it was timing. Or coincidence. Or emotional projection. They tried to place you into a category that would make things easier. But you didn't fit. You never did. You weren't a distraction. You weren't a phase. You weren't something they could just replace or rationalize away. And the more they tried, the clearer it became that what they felt for you had depth, and depth demands honesty. Those 3 words are simple in structure, but enormous in consequence. Saying them wouldn't just express emotion. It would create responsibility. It would require alignment between what they feel and how they live. It would force them to confront parts of their life that no longer sit right. It would demand courage, not romance. That's why they haven't said them yet. Not because they don't feel them. Because they do. They feel them when they hear a song that suddenly makes sense in a different way. They feel them when something good happens and you're the first person they want to tell. They feel them when something goes wrong and they wish you were the one who understood without judgment. But every time those words rise, fear meets them there. Fear of disrupting stability. Fear of consequences they can't fully predict. Fear of changing a life they've learned how to survive in, even if it no longer fulfills them. So they stay quiet. They choose restraint over release. And they tell themselves they're doing the right thing. But silence has a cost. Each day those 3 words remain unspoken, something inside them tightens. Not dramatically, quietly. It shows up as restlessness. As distraction. As moments where nothing feels quite right even when everything looks fine. That's what unexpressed truth does. It hums in the background of a person's life until it can no longer be ignored. You may have felt this on your end too, even if you couldn't explain it. A sense that the connection didn't end cleanly. That something was left hanging. That there was more beneath the surface than what was acknowledged. That feeling isn't imagination. It's resonance. When 2 people touch something real and don't speak it, the silence carries energy on both sides. Your soulmate is aware of that. They know you felt it too. They've noticed how you handled the silence, with dignity, not desperation. With awareness, not pressure. You didn't chase them for answers. You didn't force conversations. You didn't collapse into confusion. And that made the weight heavier for them, not lighter. Because it meant the connection was mutual, even without words. And mutual truth is harder to ignore than one-sided longing. The 3 words they're hiding are not waiting for the perfect moment. They're waiting for the moment when fear loses its grip. When living without honesty becomes more painful than the risk of speaking. That moment doesn't come from outside pressure. It comes from internal exhaustion. And they're getting closer to it. What's important for you to understand right now is this: their silence is not a measure of your worth. It is a measure of their readiness. You didn't imagine the depth. You didn't misread the energy. You didn't create meaning where there was none. The meaning is real. What's unresolved is their capacity to meet it openly. But here's the grounding truth you need to hold as this unfolds: you are not meant to wait in uncertainty. Awareness is not an invitation to pause your life. It's an invitation to stand firmly in your self-respect. To recognize that while someone else may be struggling to speak, you are allowed to continue becoming. Those 3 words may be hidden, but they are not disappearing. And this is only the beginning of what they mean. Stay with me a little longer. Don't skim this. Don't jump ahead in your mind trying to guess where this is going. This part isn't about suspense, it's about recognition. The kind that settles slowly, the kind that makes you exhale because something finally explains what you've been feeling without words. Your soulmate's silence isn't random. It isn't accidental. And it isn't temporary confusion. It is the result of an internal battle that has been going on far longer than you realize. A battle between truth and safety. Between who they are becoming and who they've been pretending to be in order to survive their life as it currently exists. Those 3 words didn't appear suddenly. They didn't arrive like a lightning strike. They formed gradually, through moments that felt small at the time but added up to something undeniable. Conversations that lingered in their mind long after they ended. The way your presence calmed them without effort. The way you saw through defenses they didn't even know they were still using. At some point, they realized something unsettling: they couldn't interact with you the same way they interact with everyone else. With others, they can perform. They can play roles. They can stay on the surface and feel in control. With you, that control slips. Not because you take it, but because they don't want to keep it. That loss of control is terrifying for someone who has built their life around stability, predictability, and managing outcomes. Because once you meet someone who touches your truth, pretending becomes exhausting. And exhaustion changes people. Your soulmate has tried to convince themselves that staying silent is maturity. That not speaking is the responsible choice. That saying nothing protects everyone involved. They repeat these explanations until they almost believe them. Almost. But there's a deeper awareness underneath those justifications, an awareness that silence is no longer neutral. That it has begun to feel like avoidance. Like living slightly out of alignment with themselves. They may not articulate it this way, but they feel it in their body. A heaviness in the chest when your name crosses their mind. A tightness when they imagine you moving on without knowing the truth. A strange mix of relief and sadness when they convince themselves they're doing the right thing. Because doing the right thing shouldn't feel like self-erasure. Those 3 words, the ones they desperately want to say, are not about romance in the traditional sense. They are about acknowledgement. About finally naming something that already exists instead of pretending it doesn't. About honoring what was felt without manipulating it into something smaller so it fits their current reality. They know that once those words are spoken, the connection will change forever. Not necessarily into something easier, but into something honest. And honesty demands response. That's the part that scares them most. Because honesty doesn't let you hide behind maybe. Honesty doesn't allow emotional loopholes. Honesty asks, what are you going to do with this truth now? And they don't fully know the answer yet. Your soulmate isn't holding back because they don't care. They're holding back because caring has shown them cracks in the life they've been standing on. Saying those words would force them to examine choices they've made out of fear, convenience, or obligation. It would bring into question paths they chose because they were safe, not because they were aligned. And alignment is disruptive. You may not realize this, but simply existing as yourself has already changed them. They think differently now. They feel more honestly. They notice when they're emotionally checked out in other areas of life. They feel discomfort where they once felt numbness. That's not your responsibility, but it is your impact. They didn't expect that. They expected attraction maybe. Curiosity. A passing connection. What they didn't expect was recognition, the kind that makes you question the architecture of your life. That's why they keep revisiting the same internal argument. If I say it, everything changes. If I don't say it, I have to live with knowing I didn't. And right now, they are standing between those 2 outcomes. They are also aware of you in ways you may not suspect. They notice your restraint. Your dignity. The way you didn't collapse into confusion or demand explanations. The way you allowed space without disappearing. That combination is rare. And it tells them something important. You are not someone who can be offered half-truths forever. That awareness increases the pressure. Because if they speak, they must speak cleanly. Not ambiguously. Not emotionally unloaded without accountability. They can't afford to say those 3 words and then retreat back into safety. They know that. So they wait until they believe they can stand behind what they say. The problem is, readiness doesn't arrive fully formed. It arrives in pieces. Right now, they are in the stage where the words feel heavier inside than they would have spoken. Where holding them back takes more energy than releasing them. Where silence no longer feels protective, it feels dishonest. This is why you may sense a shift. A subtle one. A feeling that something is approaching a turning point. Not because they've decided what to do, but because they can no longer live as if nothing is happening. But here is the part you must hold gently, firmly, and without illusion: their internal process is not a promise. It is real. It is meaningful. But it is not a guarantee of outcome. And you are not meant to suspend your life waiting for someone else to catch up to clarity you already carry. Your awareness of these 3 words is not meant to bind you to hope. It is meant to ground you in truth. To remind you that what you felt was real, without requiring you to remain in emotional limbo. You are allowed to continue forward. You are allowed to open to other possibilities. You are allowed to choose peace over anticipation. If and when those 3 words are spoken, they should meet you standing in your self-worth, not waiting in uncertainty. Because the truth is this: whether your soulmate speaks now or later, something irreversible has already happened. You were real enough to awaken something they cannot unfeel. That does not obligate you to stay. It simply confirms that you mattered. And in the next part, you'll understand what happens when silence finally reaches its breaking point. And why the moment they speak may not feel like the climax you once imagined, but something far more clarifying. For now, let this settle. You are not imagining this. You are not wrong for feeling it. And you are not required to wait to be whole. Stay with me. Don't skim this. This part needs to be felt, not rushed, because this is where the story shifts from wondering if those 3 words will be spoken to understanding what happens inside a soul when silence can no longer survive. This is the part most people never witness, because it happens behind closed doors, behind calm expressions, behind "I'm fine" and "everything's okay." At a certain point, your soulmate reaches an emotional saturation they didn't plan for. Silence stops being a choice and starts feeling like a burden. What once felt like control begins to feel like self-betrayal. And that transition is not dramatic. It is quiet, slow, and deeply unsettling. They begin to notice that they are tired in a way rest doesn't fix. Not physical tiredness. Not mental exhaustion. But emotional fatigue, the kind that comes from constantly editing yourself. They are tired of stopping sentences halfway in their mind. Tired of swallowing truth. Tired of pretending that something real didn't touch them deeply. This is when the 3 words stop being optional. They become necessary. At this stage, your soulmate is no longer debating whether the connection was real. That debate ended long ago. They are debating whether they can live with the version of themselves who never spoke honestly. And that question is far more painful than fear. Because fear can be justified. Regret cannot. They start imagining 2 futures. Not in a fantasy way, but in a grounded, sobering way. One future where life continues as it is now. Responsibilities met. Stability preserved. No waves made. But underneath it all, a quiet knowledge that something important was never honored. That they chose safety over truth. And then another future. A future where the truth was spoken, even if the outcome was uncertain. Even if it changed things. Even if it didn't lead to the ending they once imagined. A future where they at least know they didn't abandon themselves. That comparison changes everything. Because once a person realizes they are choosing comfort at the cost of integrity, the inner tension becomes unbearable. You see, your soulmate is not afraid of loving you. They are afraid of the life reorganization loving you would demand. Those 3 words don't just express feeling, they challenge structure. They challenge choices that were made out of fear. They challenge roles that were accepted out of obligation. They challenge narratives they've been telling themselves about who they are and what they want. And challenges like that don't announce themselves gently. They press. Your soulmate starts noticing that silence no longer protects you the way they claimed it would. They realize that by not speaking, they may have left you questioning yourself. Doubting your intuition. Wondering whether what you felt was real or imagined. And that realization hurts them more than rejection ever could. Because they never wanted to be the source of your self-doubt. They never wanted to be someone who benefited from your emotional restraint while offering none of their own truth in return. This is when guilt enters, not toxic guilt, but moral awareness. The kind that says, I owe honesty, even if I don't know the outcome. And moral awareness doesn't disappear once it arrives. It demands action. Your soulmate also becomes acutely aware of time during this phase. Not in a panicked way, but in a sobering one. They realize that time is not neutral. Every day that passes without truth is a day where opportunity quietly closes. Not just opportunity with you, opportunity to live honestly. They begin to understand something crucial: silence is also a decision. And decisions shape identity. So now, the 3 words sit closer to the surface than ever before. Not as a romantic fantasy. Not as a dramatic confession. But as a truth that wants to be acknowledged so they can move forward, in any direction, without carrying unfinished emotional weight. This is where many people assume the moment they speak will feel explosive. It won't. It will feel grounding. Because by the time a person reaches this stage, they are not chasing a response. They are choosing alignment. They are no longer asking, will this work? They are asking, can I live honestly if I don't say this? And the answer is no. So when the words come, they may come quietly. Without build-up. Without perfect timing. Without grand gestures. They may come imperfectly. Hesitantly. Even awkwardly. But they will come from truth, not impulse. And truth always lands differently. Here is something important for you to understand now, before that moment ever arrives. When someone speaks from this place, they are not offering you certainty, they are offering you reality. Reality means they may still be figuring things out. Reality means they may still be afraid. Reality means they may still not know exactly what comes next. But reality is honest. And honesty changes the emotional landscape immediately. When truth enters the room, guessing ends. You may notice that once the words are spoken, or clearly acknowledged, something in you shifts as well. Not toward excitement, but toward calm. Toward clarity. Toward grounded awareness. Because your nervous system finally receives the information it has been holding space for. And with information comes choice. That is the real power of this moment. Not that they finally said it, but that you are no longer suspended in ambiguity. You are no longer waiting in the dark. You are no longer interpreting silence. You are no longer building meaning out of absence. You are dealing with truth. And truth does not ask you to wait. It asks you to respond. This is where your growth becomes visible. Because the version of you who once waited for those words has evolved. You are no longer willing to accept words without alignment. You are no longer willing to substitute hope for action. You are no longer willing to live in emotional limbo. And that's not bitterness. That's self-respect. So whether those 3 words open a door forward or gently close one with honesty, you will be ready. Because you are no longer attached to the fantasy of what they could mean. You are grounded in what they do mean. And what they mean is this: something real existed, and it deserved truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. In the next part, you'll understand why hearing those words may not bind you closer, but instead show you how much you've outgrown waiting, and how that growth was the real purpose of this connection all along. For now, let this truth sit with you. Silence cannot survive awareness forever. And when it breaks, clarity always follows. Stay with me. This part needs patience, because it's not loud, it's not dramatic, and it's not about fantasy anymore. This is the part where reality finally settles in, not as disappointment, but as clarity. And clarity, when it arrives honestly, can feel almost unfamiliar if you've been living in anticipation for a long time. When those 3 words finally exist in the open. Whether spoken clearly, hinted at without denial, or acknowledged in a way that leaves no confusion, something unexpected happens. The emotional tension you've been carrying doesn't explode. It dissolves. Not all at once, but steadily. Like fog lifting rather than a storm breaking. That's because those words were never meant to save you. They were meant to tell the truth. And truth doesn't overwhelm when you're ready for it. It steadies you. For a long time, those 3 words lived in your imagination as something powerful enough to change everything. You may have thought hearing them would finally bring relief, certainty, or a sense of being chosen. And in a way, they do bring something important, but not what you originally expected. They bring alignment. Alignment between what you felt and what was real. Alignment between your intuition and confirmation. Alignment between your heart and your boundaries. And once that alignment happens, the waiting ends, not because you got what you hoped for, but because you no longer need to hope blindly. This is where many people misunderstand soul connections. They think the purpose is union at all costs. But sometimes the purpose is truth without illusion. And truth without illusion is what allows you to stand firmly in yourself again. Your soulmate, when they finally allow those words to exist openly, is not stepping into a fantasy. They are stepping into accountability. Because words spoken from truth carry responsibility. They are no longer hiding behind silence. They are no longer protected by ambiguity. They are exposed, not just to you, but to themselves. And exposure changes the dynamic immediately. You may notice that when the words are finally acknowledged, you don't feel smaller or more dependent. You feel taller. More present. More grounded. That's because the emotional imbalance that existed during silence has disappeared. You're no longer carrying unanswered energy alone. Clarity returns power to the listener. And power, when healthy, doesn't rush, it observes. This is the moment where you stop interpreting and start evaluating. You're no longer trying to decode what they feel. You're watching how they live. You're noticing whether their words are followed by congruent behavior or whether they remain suspended in hesitation. This is not you becoming cold. This is you becoming conscious. You understand now that words alone are not destiny. They are information. Valuable information, but not a promise of outcome. And because you understand this, you don't cling. You don't chase. You don't bargain with reality. You listen. Another quiet shift happens here that many people don't expect. The intensity you once felt begins to soften. Not because the connection wasn't real, but because unresolved tension was fueling part of that intensity. Once truth enters the room, your nervous system relaxes. It no longer needs to stay alert. Intensity without clarity creates anxiety. Intensity with clarity creates calm. And calm is where real choice lives. At this stage, you may realize that you don't actually want what you thought you wanted months ago. You don't want longing. You don't want hidden depth. You don't want almosts and maybes. You want presence. You want willingness. You want a love that doesn't ask you to wait in silence to feel secure. That realization doesn't make you demanding. It means you've grown. Your soulmate may still be processing what comes next. Saying the words does not mean they have all the answers. It means they stopped avoiding the truth. And while that is meaningful, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of honesty. And honesty asks questions. Are they ready to act in alignment with what they feel? Are they willing to disrupt comfort for truth? Are they capable of meeting you where you now stand? These are not questions you need to ask out loud. They are questions you observe through behavior, consistency, and presence over time. This is where your strength becomes visible. Because you are no longer measuring your worth by whether they move forward. You are measuring alignment by whether moving forward together makes sense for the life you are building. That shift is powerful. You are no longer beneath their choice. You are beside the truth. And being beside the truth gives you freedom. Freedom to continue if alignment exists. Freedom to release if it doesn't. Freedom to walk away without bitterness or collapse. You also begin to understand something deeply important here. Sometimes the three words are spoken not to begin a relationship, but to end confusion with integrity. And an ending with integrity is not a loss, it is a gift. It gives both people permission to move forward without unresolved energy. It allows you to carry the connection as something meaningful rather than something painful. It allows growth to complete its work. This is where you realize that the connection has already done what it came to do. It awakened discernment. It strengthened your self-trust. It showed you what depth feels like, and what hesitation feels like. And now, you can tell the difference instantly. You will never again confuse silence with mystery. You will never again confuse restraint with depth. You will never again romanticize someone's inability to meet you. That awareness is priceless. You may still feel affection. You may still feel gratitude. You may even feel sadness for what could not be. But you will not feel confusion anymore. And confusion was the heaviest part of all. This is the stage where you stop asking, what if, and start asking, what honors me? And once you ask that question honestly, your life begins to reorganize itself around your answer. That's why this part matters so much. Because this is where you stop waiting for someone else to choose courage and start choosing clarity for yourself. In the next part, you'll understand why this connection, whether it continues or not, was never meant to trap you in longing, but to prepare you for a love that arrives openly, decisively, and without fear. For now, let this truth land gently. Words reveal truth. But clarity reveals growth. And you have grown more than you realize. Stay with me through this part, because this is where everything softens and sharpens at the same time. Softens in your heart, sharpens in your awareness. This is the part where you stop looking at the connection through the lens of what could be, and start seeing it clearly for what it was meant to give you. Not confusion. Not waiting. But growth. By now, something inside you has shifted so quietly that you may not have even named it yet. You don't feel the same urgency you once felt. The ache that used to sit in your chest has changed its shape. It's no longer pulling you forward or holding you back. It's simply there, like a memory that taught you something important. And that change didn't happen because someone finally said the right words. It happened because you did the inner work while the words were missing. There was a time when you believed that hearing those 3 words would finally settle everything. That they would confirm your intuition, justify your patience, and make the waiting feel worth it. But standing here now, you realize something unexpected. The waiting itself changed you more than the words ever could. You learned how to sit with uncertainty without losing yourself. You learned how to feel deeply without begging for reassurance. You learned how to hold space for connection without abandoning your dignity. Those lessons didn't come easily. They came from long nights of reflection, from moments where you had to choose yourself quietly, from days where you felt something real but couldn't touch it. And because you lived through that honestly, you are no longer the same person who first sensed those 3 words hiding behind silence. This is why, when clarity arrived, it didn't knock you over. It met you standing. You may notice now that you don't romanticize the struggle anymore. You don't confuse emotional depth with emotional unavailability. You don't mistake hesitation for mystery. You can see plainly that while the connection was real, so was the limitation around it. And seeing both at the same time no longer hurts the way it once did. That's emotional maturity. At this stage, you begin to recognize that your soulmate's silence was never about withholding love. It was about their relationship with fear, responsibility, and change. And while understanding that brings compassion, it no longer brings self-sacrifice. You can hold empathy without stepping back into waiting. That balance is something you didn't have before. Before, you might have stayed in the question. Now, you live in the answer. The answer being, I deserve clarity, presence, and willingness, not just feeling. This is where the power dynamic truly dissolves. You're no longer oriented around whether they will step forward. You're oriented around whether stepping forward together actually aligns with the life you are building now. And that's a very different place to stand. You are no longer chasing alignment. You are embodying it. You might also notice that the connection no longer defines your emotional weather. It doesn't dictate your good days or bad days. It doesn't pull you into fantasy or frustration. It exists as something meaningful that passed through your life, not something you live inside anymore. That's not loss. That's integration. Integration means the experience has been absorbed into who you are, instead of floating around as an unresolved wound. And once something is integrated, it stops controlling you. This is also the stage where you stop needing reassurance from signs, synchronicities, or external validation. You trust your inner knowing now. You don't need the universe to keep tapping you on the shoulder. You already heard the message. And the message was never, wait longer. It was, wake up deeper. You woke up to your own emotional intelligence. You woke up to your capacity for restraint without self-denial. You woke up to the difference between connection and compatibility. Those awakenings don't disappear when one story ends. They follow you into every future connection. You may feel moments of sadness here, not sharp pain, but a gentle grief for what could not become what you once imagined. That grief is clean. It doesn't consume you. It passes through you. And it doesn't mean you want to go back. It means you cared. And caring without clinging is a sign of real growth. At this point, you are no longer trying to extract meaning from the connection. The meaning has already revealed itself. It taught you how deeply you can feel, and how clearly you can see when you stop negotiating with uncertainty. It showed you what resonance feels like, and it showed you what happens when resonance meets hesitation. You will never forget that contrast. And because you won't forget it, you will never again settle for half-formed love. You won't stay where words don't become action. You won't confuse emotional intensity with emotional availability. You won't wait in silence hoping someone else will become ready. Not because you're hardened. Because you're honest. This is the part of the journey where your standards stop being defensive and start being natural. You don't have to explain them. You don't have to enforce them aggressively. You simply live from them. And anything misaligned quietly falls away on its own. That's power without force. You may also notice that you feel more present in your life now. Less distracted by what might happen. More rooted in what is happening. You show up differently in conversations. You listen more closely to yourself. You choose environments that feel safe, open, and mutual. This is what happens when you stop waiting for someone else's courage and start honoring your own. And here's the quiet truth that sits at the center of this part: the connection did not fail. It completed its purpose. Its purpose was not to trap you in longing. It was not to keep you guessing. It was not to leave you questioning your worth. Its purpose was to refine you. To bring you to a place where love is no longer something you chase or endure, but something you recognize when it arrives correctly. Standing here now, you don't need to ask what comes next. You already know. What comes next must meet you fully. What comes next must speak and act. What comes next must arrive without fear. And if it doesn't, you will not be tempted to wait. You will simply keep walking, steady, open, and grounded. That is the real ending of this part of the story. Not closure. Clarity. And clarity, once earned, never leaves you. Stay with me all the way through this last part. Not because something dramatic is about to happen, but because something settled is about to happen. This is the part where the story stops circling around another person and finally comes home to you. Quietly. Gently. Permanently. By now, you may notice that you are no longer waiting in the way you once did. You might still remember. You might still care. But the emotional posture has changed. You're not leaning forward anymore, searching for signs, interpreting pauses, or bracing for messages. You're standing upright in your own life. And that shift didn't come from answers being given. It came from truth being accepted. This is what real resolution looks like. It doesn't arrive as excitement. It doesn't arrive as certainty about the future. It arrives as peace with the present. You've reached the place where you no longer need the 3 words to define the connection. You understand now that words were never the core issue. Alignment was. Readiness was. Capacity was. And once you see that clearly, the story reorganizes itself without effort. You are no longer asking, why couldn't they say it? You are asking, why would I wait for what no longer matches who I am? That question is not bitter. It's calm. And calm questions lead to honest answers. At this stage, something important happens in your nervous system. It stops scanning. It stops bracing. It stops replaying. The emotional vigilance that once lived inside you slowly powers down. Not because you stopped caring, but because there is nothing left to protect against. You are no longer in emotional limbo. You are grounded. Grounded in the truth that you didn't imagine the connection. Grounded in the truth that it mattered. Grounded in the truth that it didn't need to continue to be meaningful. This grounding gives you something you may not have felt in a long time, emotional spaciousness. You have room again, room to feel without urgency, to connect without anxiety, to imagine without attaching your worth to outcomes. And from that space, you start to see the connection in its final, honest form. Not as unfinished business. Not as a missed opportunity. But as a completed chapter. Completion does not mean forgetting. It means the chapter no longer asks anything from you. It doesn't demand revisiting. It doesn't pull you backward. It sits in your life like a well-read page, meaningful, but no longer open. This is also the moment when you stop identifying as someone who was almost chosen or left waiting. Those identities quietly fall away because they were never true. You were never waiting because you were lacking. You were waiting because you were present in something that required 2 people to meet at the same level, and only one of you was there. That realization doesn't wound you anymore. It liberates you. You understand now that timing is not just about circumstances. It's about capacity. 2 people can feel something real and still not be able to meet each other honestly. That doesn't invalidate the feeling, it defines the limit. And limits are not personal failures. They are information. Information that helps you move forward with dignity instead of doubt. At this stage, you may notice that your standards have shifted without effort. You are not trying to be selective. You simply are. Your body responds differently now. You feel misalignment quickly and without panic. You feel resonance clearly and without obsession. You trust yourself to know the difference. That trust is one of the greatest gifts this entire experience gave you. Because now, love is no longer something you hope to be worthy of. It is something you expect to be mutual, open, and lived, not hidden, delayed, or withheld. You don't feel the need to explain this to anyone. You don't feel the need to justify your boundaries or narrate your healing. You live it. quietly, consistently. And the right people recognize it without being taught. This is also where forgiveness takes on its final form. Not forgiveness as reconciliation. Not forgiveness as forgetting. But forgiveness as release. You release the version of them who couldn't speak. You release the version of yourself who waited in uncertainty. You release the story as something that still needs resolution. And in that release, you don't lose anything of value. You gain freedom. Freedom from mental loops. Freedom from emotional bargaining. Freedom from defining yourself through unfinished connections. You may feel moments of tenderness here, a softness toward what was shared, a gratitude for what was awakened. That tenderness is clean. It doesn't trap you. It reminds you that you are capable of depth without self-abandonment. That is not something everyone learns. You did. And because you did, the future opens differently. Not with fireworks. Not with guarantees. But with quiet confidence. You are no longer asking the universe to bring someone who will choose you. You are aligned with the version of yourself who will only remain where choice is clear. That alignment acts like a filter. It removes struggle before it starts. It attracts clarity without effort. This is what people mean when they say someone is ready for real love. Not because they healed perfectly. Not because they stopped feeling. But because they stopped waiting where they weren't being met. If someone enters your life now, they will feel the difference immediately. They will sense that you are not available for ambiguity. That you are open, but not unguarded. That you are warm, but not uncertain. That you know what it feels like to stand alone, and therefore choose connection, not need it. That is the energy you carry forward. And if your soulmate ever looks back, if they ever fully realize what those 3 words meant, what speaking them too late cost, what silence couldn't protect, that understanding will belong to them. Not you. Your work here is complete. You didn't lose this story. You graduated from it. You leave with clarity instead of confusion. With strength instead of longing. With self-trust instead of waiting. And the most important truth of all sits quietly beneath everything now. You are no longer preparing for love. You are available for it. Available in a way that doesn't beg, chase, or hope blindly. Available in a way that recognizes truth when it arrives and lets go when it doesn't. That is not an ending. That is a beginning, one that starts inside you and moves outward, naturally, without force. And this time, whatever comes next will not need to hide its words. Because you won't stay where truth has to be buried.